Have you ever seen the Wandering Campfire? There are times in our life that can define us, tell us who we are. We go around thinking we know how the world works, and then these moments hit us like a freight train. Suddenly, we realize that we know nothing at all. This is one of those instances, and it's something that you won't be prepared for, no matter how much you think you could be. I thought I was. I thought I knew what to expect. I was wrong. Maybe your experience will be different than mine. Maybe you can press your luck. If so, listen closely. What follows may save your life, should you see the Wandering Campfire. It likes the dark. This fact has been confirmed by all eyewitnesses. Some say that it's the shadows which attract the flickers of the blaze. Others claim the light of the embers comes first and the darkness follows. One thing is for certain, only at night will you see it. Not an ordinary night, of course. Otherwise, every Tom, Frank, and Harry would see the damned thing. That would be making things easy. And that's not how it works. It needs to be on the blackest night of the year. The kind of nights where you can't even see your hand in front of your face without a flashlight. You need to be stumbling. You need to be lost so it can be found. A map won't help you, but going deeper into the woods definitely will. In the forest, it can stay hidden. It can trick you. This is its turf, and you're just an intruder after all. So, find a place that makes you feel uneasy, where there are no signs of life for miles. It may take some time, days perhaps, but then again, if you're taking this journey, you know that what lies ahead isn't meant for the faint of heart. Your time is already stolen from you the moment you start to look. By then, it's already too late. Once you have passed the last known memories of civilization, you'll keep going, of course, deeper into the forest to listen to nature. But you shouldn't expect to come back. Those that do come back are changed. One woman said she was enlightened. The universe suddenly turned upside down, and yet all made sense, she said, more than it ever had. The unknown is tangible, if but for a moment. Don't expect it to suddenly be understood. Expect only your world to be transformed as well. I had already seen my fair share of bad luck before I went into the woods that day, having just come out of drug rehab but a week before. The accidents had changed me, rotted my insides, and made me bitter. My wife gone. No longer was I the stable rock she knew. I needed purpose again. Find the fire, my best friend Trudy told me. Trudy had been in and out of rehab several times before I showed up, so much so that the staff there called him a regular customer. We bonded because we were broken, and I could see glimmers of myself in him, a man that lost everything, struggling to keep going for no reason at all. Trudy admitted that he had tried suicide several times, but the world kept pulling him back. He was the one that told me about the Wandering Campfire. During a therapy session, of all places, the interventionist had asked, was there anything in this world that could give him a reason to go on? Trudy paused, thoughtful, reflective. There was hurt in his eyes, like he was trying to suppress an old wound and at the same time, someone was pouring salt on it. I'll never forget what he said. Nobody has a reason to go on. Not really. We tell ourselves we do, and we keep suffering. Life is pain. I've accepted that. Death is a release, but it's a give and take. You won't get that freedom unless you give up everything. And that last bit of suffering, it can be hard to let go. Because it's final, it's absolute, and that is terrifying. Then he took a sip of water, and I swear no one could hear a pin drop. He had more to say. There's a story I heard, he said, looking at me with dead eyes, about a campfire that moves in the darkest forest on earth. It's a legend, probably older than all of us combined, but it's one that has stuck with me. This lonesome, burning signal, beckoning anyone who dares to come find it, offering something more freeing than death. And what does it give? I can't believe that the staff asked this. Maybe they hoped that Trudy would break from the story and realize he was speaking gibberish. Or maybe they were genuinely intrigued. I think that's the beauty of it. When you hear about something more exhilarating than life or death, something unknown is the only force more powerful than that. He said he didn't know. He never had the guts to go look. Something told him that if he did, it would be beyond his comprehension to even explain. That was more terrifying than anything he had ever experienced in life or in death. After the session, I pulled him aside, asking more about the strange wandering fire. Something like that couldn't be real. And if it was, what would make it so tantalizing to risk everything for? Trudy smiled. He knew I was thinking of searching for it once I was clean. The world is made of more than what's real and what's not. We both know that. He told me. And then he admitted it, how he really knew about the campfire. He has seen it in his near-death experiences, a flickering blaze that was tugging on his soul. The fire could be the end of everything, or it could be the beginning. We don't know, he admitted. And I still don't, of course, not even after what I have seen. That night, when I went, I brought with me supplies for 3 days. A bedroll, some water, some food, a hunting rifle to scare off wildlife. Nothing that would slow me down. Trudy had told me that once I found it, the chase would be on. The fire would draw me further away from reality and closer to the truth. The closest thing to the truth I would ever experience. I kept my senses about me at first. I think that's parts of the way it draws you in. There was nothing about the woods that made me feel comfortable. It had been ages since I actually went for a hike of any kind. Not since before my accident. The world hasn't felt safe to even dare to explore, and I haven't had the energy to consider going out. But the stories of the campfire made me have that desire again. A reason to keep going. I've never been one to believe in ghosts, never even believed in God. So, what made the campfire different? It was the way people described their experiences. It felt authentic. It felt real. I knew some of them were fake. Those were easy enough to sift through. When you feel the leaves crunching under your feet and you don't know where you are, and the stars and the sky start to all blend together. There is no faking that. And that was what I was beginning to feel as the night got darker. The forest was closing in. The instructions told me to draw symbols on the forest floor, not to help me find my home, but to help the campfire find me. The first sign you will get is a smell. Most campfires have an earthly scent to them, something that makes you feel connected to nature, a soothing aroma that makes you feel comfortable. When you stand in the darkness and you etch those ancient ruins in the dark, you aren't inviting anything that could be remotely considered pleasant. The smell will hit you the same way you feel when you have seen a dead body, animal, or human, making you want to turn your head and vomit. I made the mistake of eating before I even left the roads, so as it wafted over me, I began to hurl up my guts, feeling dizzy and faint. I could hardly keep myself standing. The world was spinning and I felt that I was going to fall off. This can last a few minutes or even a few hours, but the important thing is to go toward the smell. That repugnant odor is the only evidence you have so far that will connect you to the beyond. It's the first step to recognizing this reality you experience isn't so easily understood. As you keep moving, your first encounter with the campfire will be the most difficult. You'll see a flicker of the fire that is gently nudging itself in and out of the darkness. Between the trees, it's hardly visible at all, and you may tell yourself that your eyes are playing tricks on you, because it will seem as though each time you look away, the campfire will move. The key is to stay focused, no matter how much your eyes burn or how difficult it will feel to walk. Your legs will be heavy, your hands might be numb, but it will be a black hole drawing you toward it. The closer you get, the faster it will come to you. There will be something different for everyone at that first sighting, but there will always be a place to sit down. The fire will fill you with anxiety as you get close. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stick up as I stood there, facing it, and realizing that the legends were all real. Part of me wanted to turn and run away. How far would it take me to return to the real world? An hour? A day? Could I ever return at all? The mesmerizing flames told me that it wouldn't be possible. Instead, I would need to wait and watch and see where the campfire took me. My journey into the beyond was starting here. You must offer the campfire something that you can't afford to lose. That is a part of the ritual that never wavers. It can be anything that was a part of your life, perhaps an important item given to you by a loved one, something that you didn't want to leave behind, a picture or a piece of jewelry. The instructions tell you that if the offering isn't good enough, the campfire will simply diffuse and the forest will return. You only get one chance. I didn't want to risk losing this opportunity. I took out the Swiss Army knife and held my hand near the log that was closest to the fire. The blade touched the ring finger and I closed my eyes, wondering if it would make any sense to even pray. I pressed down as hard as I could, blood spilling out as flesh was torn away. The blade made a quick cut. It was final and couldn't be taken back. The finger was severed from my body. At the same time, I pressed my bleeding hand toward my jacket, trying to hold back a scream. This was my offering, and I knew the fire would realize its meaning, because attached to the flesh was my last memory of my wife, the golden ring that I vowed to keep no matter what, my last tangible connection to this world, and my first big step to the world beyond. The bleeding was still throbbing through my body as I picked up the raggedy piece of flesh and tossed it into the fire. The inferno blazed up, clouding my vision as I covered my eyes instinctively. Then the fire began to move. It had accepted the finger, and it was taking me somewhere else. I had only but a moment to grab my things and rush through the woods towards it. I wish I had hesitated. I wish I hadn't taken this insane journey. But I knew there was no turning back, more so than ever before. Past the points of no return, the Wandering Campfire was guiding me to the ultimate truth of existence, and I was dragged toward it like a fish with a hook in its mouth. As you move forward, it will feel as though you have gone nowhere. Have you ever driven through a long, dark tunnel? The kind that shows a glimmer of light, but the walls blend together over and over as you go further down it. This is what the forest will do to you. The trees will seemingly push themselves apart and then fall back into place as the campfire moves. At first, it will be a gentle flow. The ground itself won't move, or at least it won't seem to. The closest way to describe it is walking on a treadmill. You go down that same path over and over, a carrot dangling in your face that tells you that you will reach the finish line, and yet, each step you make toward the campfire, it's a little further away. Then, the fire will start to feel further away. Again, nothing will change around you, but as you begin to walk toward it, it may feel as though the forest is going in reverse, except every part of you knows that you are going forward, trying to reach for that inescapable feeling of purpose that is tantalizingly offering to you. And then the forest will continue to fall away. The trees, the sky, the stars. Eventually, nothing will be left except for the campfire itself. The darkness of the ground will make you think that you are falling, and you can't stop it now. It's rushing toward you again, and you feel that you are going to fall into the blaze. Finally, you are exactly where the force of nature wants you. The fire is larger now, almost as if it's encompassing the entire forest. And then you will need to sit and wait. There is nothing to sit on, of course, only darkness. You must close your eyes and trust that you don't fall. The rest will happen automatically. You will feel that you are sitting in a cold, hard chair, and the fire will flicker and invite you to touch it. There won't be any warmth. You will feel colder than you have felt ever before in your entire life. This sense of dread will wash over you. You will feel that you are constantly waiting for something. All sense of time, night and day, or anything you once were clinging to us is going to be gone. Then, across the fire, you will see a figure, a darkness that stands tall and silently across the fire, an evil that you know is from beyond any hell you could ever conjure up. I felt something heavy on my chest, a hot coal burning my skin. I couldn't speak, and I knew the instructions told me I shouldn't. this was the time to listen. The shadow would do the talking. It uttered my name first. As it seemed to sit down, I numbly nodded, a breath of icy air hitting my bones. Do you understand where you are? It asked. I couldn't help but to be surprised. It was offering me the chance to answer, something I was sure I wasn't supposed to do. Instead, I kept quiet as it repeated the question several times until at last it became angry and tossed embers towards my face. If you don't know, then what brought you here? The fires hit me and I instinctively screamed. I thought that moment was my last in this life. Instead, the shadows simply lingered, waiting for me to actually tell my story. I was in an accident about 18 months ago, I said, hardly recognizing my own voice. Was I really doing the talking, or was it still the shadow? It felt as though we both shared the same resonance in that moment. My wife and I, we were going to this function. It was a horrible storm. I told her we shouldn't go. She insisted that it mattered. But the ice on the road, black ice, I couldn't see it. I hit it hard and my reflexes got the better of me. The car tumbled end over end down the highway. We collided with 4 other cars. I felt everything. The intense pain shook through my body, and it kept me awake as I saw bodies piling up around me. 8 cars, at least 13 dead, several children included, along with my wife. The news called it the worst accident in the history of the state in the past 10 years. I don't know if that's true, but I died that day. I saw everything that I loved taken away from me, and I was one of the few still standing, one of the few that crawled out with hardly anything but bruises. People told me it was God, a miracle to help me appreciate life. I turned to drugs. I turned to suicide, but none of it has left me satisfied. I don't believe any of those answers. I think I had to come here to find this fire, to see the beyond, so that I could understand. As I finished my story, silence loomed between us. The figure stood there, staring either at me or the campfire, saying nothing. Was it trying to determine if I should live or if I should die? I wanted my suffering to end. I wanted absolution. Instead, a cold, dead laugh rumbled through the darkness. It made me feel like nothing. It made me suddenly aware that my suffering, my very existence, was meaningless. In the grand universe, my problems, my heartbreak, it would all be eventually consumed by a fire much like the one sitting in front of me. Nothingness is eternal. Misery and pain are life, and endlessness is the only absolute serenity that anyone can attain. When you kept living, you thought it meant you had purpose. You thought it might mean your life would have a reason. But no life does. Nothing does. Existence is chaos. The shadow told me as it grew taller. Long, slender arms reached up and beyond the view of the fire, like a spider's legs reaching for a prone fly that was caught in a web. Then, Those arms morphed into claws, razor-sharp tendrils that began to snake their way toward me. Let me offer you the freedom of non-existence, the shadow rumbled as the entire forest began to push its way back toward us. It felt that I was being swallowed whole by the woods. The trees were melting into twisted and rotten flesh, sliding down to the ground and becoming blackened burnt fingers that were reaching to drag me to the inferno. The branches snapped and turned toward me, the hollow wood morphing into faces of people that I had hurt, that I had harmed, all snarling at me and snapping their jagged teeth toward me. Suddenly, I felt the urge to run, to live, no matter the moments of suffering that I was enduring. I couldn't end my life here. The reflection of my wife's face came into the campfire. Her soft eyes urged me to action. Then, those same comfortable eyes turned dead, color drained. This was the end of everything. This was all that the campfire would ever offer me. It was all that anyone could ever grasp or understand. The shadow was covering the entire sky, its laughter echoing throughout the forest. Sharp spikes rippled across the floor, and the canopy became filled with falling knives. My back was torn to ribbons. My running soon became a crawl. I was falling into the earth, into the eternal wandering blaze. All it wanted was suffering to fuel the flame. My legs hit the fire, scarring my back, ankles, and feet first as I screamed and fought. The shadow kept lurching forward, towering over me as molten fire dripped onto my face. This was what I wanted, to suffer for my life, to pay for what I felt was my fault. But was this hell my freedom? Was my life null and void? Something stirred deep inside me, and I pushed my way toward the flame even further. I recognized this was the sacrifice I should have offered, my very soul. Only then would I get the absolution I sought. Flames engulfed my body as I struggled to cover my eyes. The campfire grew larger, and the laughter was covered over by the roaring fire. I was falling deeper to the depths of darkness that would melt away all of reality. Then I was rising, pushed up back to the ground, spitting and sputtering like a newborn. I was hardly able to move as the fire disappeared and my charred and blackened body lay prone on the forest floor. I was dead. I felt nothing. I was nothing. And then I was opening my eyes and looking at my beautiful wife. She looked so much younger, so kind and caring. She was standing at the campfire, about to jump in, and she was telling me that it was going to be okay. Move on, she said. Live and love. That was what my existence needed to be. I promised her I would. I promised I would make sense of the chaos that we were given. Then the forest sky came back. The lonesome woods. I lay there for days, maybe before other hikers find me. They didn't even know if I was still human. Maybe I wasn't anymore. I was taken to heal, but part of me has stayed there even now. I still feel the fire everywhere I go. It burns inside me. My soul is part of this internal endless chaos. It is consuming others, giving them a peek into the unknown. I saw it there, beyond death, this endless madness that will devour us all. It was wanting. It was waiting in the fire. It was in the shadow, and it is now inside me. For I am death, walking this earth and carrying the fire where I, sharing my experience to others who hunger for that freedom, enticing them to seek out the unknown. The campfire will grow. It will always move and make us the weak and the fragile. But most importantly of all, it will burn. It will burn the world. How to tell a campfire story. The ancient Greeks would gather from far and wide to hear the traveling bard tell tales of odysseys and the gods. The tradition is alive and well today at summer camps, although the tales have taken on a more darker twist. Tonight, children will gather around the fire pit to listen to the modern bard tell the stories of what stalks these very woods. Telling a campfire story is a performance, and Jake was a master of the craft. We met in the library during elementary school while studying the works of the horror master R.L. Stine. We devoured any books of horror stories that slipped their ways into our school library. Our favorite was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It was a collection of diverse stories short enough to be remembered and retold. Through studying these tales, we created our own to tell on the playground. After honing our craft, we were ready for the time-honored tradition of telling campfire stories. Each summer, we scared the pants off of our audience and learned new tricks. That is, until that fateful night in 2003. The stage was set. We were the older kids around the slowly dying fire. We started with our classic opener to lull our audience into a false sense of security. Jake started out setting the scene with the farmer hearing a strange noise in his attic. He loads up his shotgun and slowly climbs the stairs. He pushes open the door to the attic with a creak as I do the sound effect. It's too dark to see, so he takes a few steps forward into the attic when suddenly, right there is my cue to let out a blood-curdling scream. Then Jake pauses for the effect. What was it? What happened? The audience would ask. Well, you would scream too if you stepped on a nail while barefoot, I would say. There was no monster lurking in the shadows. It was just the setup for a real knee slapper. Well, their stories aren't that scary, our audience would think to themselves. But just in case a few would leave anyway. They weren't scared, of course. It was just getting late, and they wanted to go to bed. Now was the time for the main event. The first story gave us time to let the fire get low enough that you could no longer see the edge of the woods. As the light danced across his face, Jake would cast the line, "Have you heard the one about the creature that stalks the forest on a quiet summer night?" Before the last couple of kids left around the fire can reply, I lay the bait, quickly interjecting with, "That one is pretty scary. I'm not sure if little Timmy here can handle it." That's when Timmy would take the hook, line, and sinker, getting defensive, assuring us that he wasn't scared. Jake would launch into the story at this point. First, the monster needs a name. Whatever camp we happened to be at, plus a scary adjective, was usually our formula to come up with the name. On this particular night, the story was about the Tecumseh Terror. For the creature's origin, we went with an old Indian legend that night. When we used that one, we just picked a well-known tribe at random, like Apache or Cherokee. It didn't matter if they had never lived in the area. It was just a piece of set dressing. Next came the story of the last attack. The story goes, we found that 30 years ago was usually a good time frame. It was long enough ago to not be easily debunked, but recent enough that the beast still roamed the area growling, hungry for flesh. If anyone asked how we knew the story, we just mentioned an old newspaper in the library archives. It was vague enough to be plausible and too much of a hassle to find and verify it later. The beast was a massive cat that stalked these very woods, according to the legend. It would scratch around a victim's tent before dragging them away to its lair deep in the woods. From there, we would keep supplying details until someone in the audience looked sufficiently scared. On that night, our mark was a kid named Dan. His eyes were as wide as dinner plates, and he was shifting around in his seat, stealing glances towards the woods. We wrapped up the story and said that was all for the night. Time to get some sleep. Now for the finishing touch. We waited for about an hour, then grabbed some branches and made our way towards Dan's tent on the edge of the woods. We dragged the branches along the canvas, making low growls in the throat. Jake started making his way to the back of the tent when the scream pierced the night, but it wasn't Dan as I had expected it. Jake was frozen in fear, staring at the back of the tent, which had been torn apart. Dan was gone, and a trail of blood and massive claw marks led off into the forest. The rest of the night was a blur. We woke the adults and contacted camp staff to organize a search party. They combed the woods all night and well into the next afternoon, but they never found a trace of Dan out in those woods. Our group left the camp that afternoon. We never heard about Dan again. The camp just covered it up as a freak animal attack. Jake and I grew apart after that. We never told anyone this story. No one would believe us anyways. As you read this, bathed in the warm glow of your computer screen, you can easily brush it off as a story. But every story has a grain of truth to it. If you're anything like Jake and I, and I'm sure you are given that you're reading this, you've heard your fair share of stories that made your blood run cold. So, the next time you hear a bump in the night, ask yourself, were those really just stories? For a number of years, I was a camp counselor at an overnight camp in the Muskokas. I loved it more than any job that I've ever had. Despite the non-existent pay, annoying campers, long days, short nights, and crappy food, for one, I got to tell as many scary stories as I could sputter out. There was nothing better than hanging around a dying campfire with a bunch of junior high kids who were demanding the most scariest, most blood-curdling tales I knew. And I told them all. The babysitter and the eerie clown statue. Or how about the driver and the creepy gas attendant? Or my favorite, the woman and her looking dog. I saved my best stories for the overnight trips we made in Algonquin Park. For non-Canadians, it's a massive park in the middle of Ontario, spanning nearly 8,000 square kilometers, when days would be spent canoeing on pristine lakes, and nights would be spent around the fire, singing and making s'mores, and being as rowdy as the only people within miles can be. Once the kids had quieted down, I told them stories of a stalker in the woods with a face so horrifying it paralyzed all of its victims in fear, or the group of campers who decided to spend a night across the lake from an abandoned, insane asylum. However, on this particular night, I'd finished up the tales, once again insisting that they were entirely true, and sent the campers to their tents. It had been an exhausting day, and none of the 6 kids were in any mood to stay up later. My fellow counselor had also decided to pack it in, leaving just me on a fallen log next to the dying fire. I took a deep breath of the cool, fresh pine-scented air and looked out at the lake. The partial moon reflected off the glassy water, and on the other side, I could see towering cliffs going up several hundred feet. I considered whether we could canoe over, climb up a few dozen feet, and do some cliff jumping. I grinned. The camp director would have my head if we did that, or if he found out. Movements at the very top of the cliffs caught my eye. There was a small light bobbling along the peak. At first, I thought it was a star, but it was larger and gave off a golden glow. It slowly moved back and forth in a small arc. As I sat up and watched it, another appeared next to it, bobbing along the top of the cliff, then another, and another, and a few more. My stomach dropped into my feet. I grabbed my bag and pulled my digital camera out, then focused it on the little glowing orbs and used the zoom function. I counted them, and then I counted again. In a flash, I was up and running to the tents. Hey guys, wake up, we gotta go. There was movement in the tents, and then I had 7 confused heads looking out at me. My co-counselor wore a mixture of concern and pure anger. I hate to do this, I continued, but the clouds are looking rather threatening. There's a big rainstorm coming, and if we get caught in it, it's going to ruin our trip. Seriously? Laura, my co-counselor, asked. We're in the middle of the woods. Where would we go? I pulled a map and flashlight out of my bag. There's a ranger station a few kilometers south of us. I traced the path with my finger. Thank God. We can make it there in a few hours. The campers groaned. Can't we just go in the morning? No, I shouted, my voice echoing across the lake. I lowered it. Come on, let's back up and go. I'll tell you a story along the way. I smiled, though I could feel my lips quivering. It's my best one yet. That seemed to get them going, and within 10 minutes, the tents were packed up and we'd begun our trek into the deep woods. With small flashlights as our only guide, I was confident we were moving at a steady pace. I allowed myself to relax and began to tell my favorite campfire story. Centuries before the European settlers made their way into the country, it was inhabited by the First Nations people. They had made the trip from across Western Canada, following the migration patterns of large animals such as buffalo and bison. Eventually, they reached Ontario, at which point they split off into smaller groups of travelers each searching for a section of land to call their own. Legend has it that one group, consisting of about 20 men, women, and children, adventured through this area in search of a place to call home. Though it wasn't the end of October, the weather had made a turn for the worse, and as the group journeyed around the lake, a fierce blizzard hit. Within an hour, the group found themselves in blinding snow and below zero temperatures. The clothes they had on them were made for the fall, not this sort of weather, and there weren't any Canada Goose jackets around back then, but they pressed on. They didn't have any other choice. Night was falling as they reached a cliff bluff, which towered over a cold, choppy lake. There was no stopping for this group. They'd die if they didn't make it past the cliffs. But with darkness setting in and the snow falling even harder, visibility was almost non-existent. So, one of the elders had an idea. Using the little kerosene they had left, he lit a lantern for each of the travelers and had them carry it in front of them, not so that they could see the cliffs, but so they could see who was in front of them, allowing them to all follow each other across the narrow bluffs. With the strongest of the men leading the way, the group began to cross the cliffs. The freezing, wet snow soaked every bone in their body. The harsh wind chilled any exposed skin and threatened to push them right off the rock. Their path was no more than a few feet wide and would have been slippery to even the best of hiking boots, let alone hand-fashioned moccasins. Slowly, they made their way up the cliffs, praying that whatever lay on the other side could shelter them from the intensifying storm. They were about halfway up, hundreds of feet above the lake, though it was well out of their vision. In fact, all they could see in this blinding storm was the lantern in front of them, acting as a beacon to guide their steps. If the light moved up, they moved up. If it went down, they moved down. Each of the travelers was almost in a trance, caring about nothing but the glowing orb a few feet away. For the leader, though, there was no such luxury. He moved forward blindly, feeling along the cliff with his free arm, though his skin was so numb he could barely feel anything. As the path wound back again, he made a misstep and lost his footing. Just as a gust of wind blasted his back, he desperately grasped for the hold, but his frozen fingers couldn't get anything. With a terrified scream, he slipped off the cliffs and fell into the icy black lake. The rest of the party didn't see him fall, of course. All they saw was his glowing orb dropping away from the bluff and disappearing in the darkness. There was no time to mourn. They continued on, but the storm was worsening. After another minute, one of the children, his body unable to withstand the cold, dropped away, his lantern glowing until the choppy waters put it out. Another, having seen this, lost his balance and fell. This pattern went on until there was just 5 people left, fumbling along in the darkness, following the lights in the front. As hard as they tried, the cliffs were unforgiving. The remaining men fell down to 4, then 3, and 2. And then there was just one, who, legend says, cursed the earth as his legs slipped and he plunged hundreds of feet down, his lantern the last one to be extinguished. Of the 20 members who tried to overcome the cliffs, I finished, not one of them survived. They say that sometimes, when the conditions are right, you can see the orbs along the cliff, symbols of the lost travelers who will never find their homes. As the story ended, leaving the campers in an eerie silence, I saw lights up ahead. A wave of relief poured over me. We picked up the pace and found the ranger station bursting with activity, with a half dozen people running around, loading up trucks and shouting into radios. The wind was beginning to really pick up, and I heard the thunder in the distance. "Hey, you kids." A large, burly man with a full beard and mustache ran up on us. "Get in the trucks. We don't have much time." Laura and I led the kids to one of the pickup trucks. "What's going on?" I asked the man. "Didn't you hear?" Another gust of wind. Huge storm systems heading right for us. There's already been tornadoes that touched down. We're getting everyone out of here. Let's go. We all climbed into the truck's bed. I collapsed down, feeling like I'd just been punched in the gut. The ranger climbed into the front, and we took off down a makeshift road. My head was spinning. It wasn't possible. "How?" Laura slid next to me, keeping her voice low. "How did you know we had to get out of there?" I looked over at her. My face felt empty of any blood. "I saw the lights." "What?" No, she gasped, then caught herself. "How many?" I took a deep breath. 8. She looked around at all the campers, who were now lying against each other, asleep despite the bumpy road. "That's all of us. My God." I nodded and leaned against her. Laura had heard the traveler's story before, and she knew that I'd left out a key bits of information. The lights were real, but they were never random. If they were shining, bobbing back and forth, swinging in a small arc, it was because they had a message. Or rather, a warning. One light would shine for each person who was about to die. Don't tell Skinwalker stories around the campfire. I was camping in Arizona with my cousin. We built a fire, then got some marshmallows out to make some s'mores. It was a warm night, but we were having a good time. I hadn't gone camping with my cousin in years since we were teenagers. I blew the flame out on my marshmallow and crushed it in between 2 graham crackers and chocolate. "Do you want to hear a scary story?" my cousin asked with a sly grin on his face. When we were younger, he used to always tell good scary stories around the fire. I couldn't help but get excited. "Let's see if you still got it," I said with my own grin. "Have you ever heard of a skinwalker?" he asked, popping a marshmallow in his mouth. "Yeah. Isn't it a native legend? Something about turning into a coyote?" "Yes. A skinwalker is a Navajo witch that wears skins of animals and can turn into any animal they want." He leans in closer so the fire illuminates his face. "What's so scary about that?" I asked. "You don't want to run into one. Trust me. I have." I said nothing, waiting for him to continue on with the story. "I was visiting my friend on the res one day, the summer after graduation. We were hanging out on the porch, talking about what we were gonna do now that school was over. Just wasting the night away, you know. Then I noticed a coyote just wandering around a few yards away. Now, in this neighborhood, there weren't any fences dividing the yards, so I could see it walk from yard to yard. I nudged my friend and nodded over to it. We got quiet and just watched it. Then it stood up on 2 feet. It was pressed up against the house in the shadows and just scooted along on 2 feet like a human. I was so shocked. I didn't think coyotes could do that. My friend whispered to me, "That's no coyote." I asked him what he meant. That? That's a skinwalker. Now, he had mentioned skinwalkers to me before, but I thought it was just a legend, and that he surely didn't believe some old scary story his parents told him to scare him from playing in the woods at night. Once it was next to a garbage can, it hopped on top of it, then leaped up, grabbing onto the window ledge. The window was open. Fear filled my body as I realized two things. No coyote could do that, and whoever was in that room was about to have a very bad night. Next, we heard the guy in that room screaming. Then, his screams were drowned out by another scream that was somewhat of a mix of an animal and a human. We fell out of our chairs, scrambling to get inside. We locked all the doors and windows and hid. That was the scariest night of my life. I don't remember if cops showed up to that house. We were too scared to leave the room and check, but it's a night I'll never forget. Goosebumps covered my arms. Now that was a good story. I didn't believe him about it being true, but it was a good story nonetheless. Looks like you still got it. That was good. Got me being scared to look into the trees. I laughed nervously, looking behind me at the forest that seems just a little scarier now. Hey, every word of that is true. I didn't make this one up. No need to make up a scary story when you've lived it, you know? We sat in silence for a bit, and I thought about the story he just told. For some reason, a coyote creeping around on 2 legs just seems comical. I laughed to myself. Maybe it would be creepier in person. After another 30 minutes, the fire dies down and we crawl into our tent. All thoughts of skinwalkers had left our heads. I was drifting off to sleep when a stick snapping outside our tent woke me up. My face was facing the wall of the tent, and I don't think I'd quite registered what woke me up. After a few seconds, I closed my eyes and prepared to go back to sleep. Then, I heard my cousin outside the tent calling my name. I opened my eyes. I assumed my cousin had stepped outside for some reason, but I didn't know what he would need me for out there. I didn't quite want to leave my sleeping bag, so I was just gonna pretend like I didn't hear him. I closed my eyes again, but then I heard him call me out again. Annoyed, I sat up to leave the tent. That's when I noticed my cousin right next to me, asleep. I knew I heard him call me from outside the tent. I heard it twice. There was no mistake. I shook him awake. "What do you want?" he asked groggily, not opening his eyes. "I heard your voice outside the tent calling my name. Am I going crazy?" He opened his eyes with a panicked look on his face. "You're absolutely sure? My voice?" he asked. "Yeah, twice in fact. There was no mistaking it." He pulls me down to the ground next to him. We hear some shuffling outside the tent. I started to freak out a little. "That's a skinwalker. They can imitate voices. That's how they draw you in," he whispers. "A skinwalker? Are you sure? What's the odds of a skinwalker showing up the same night you tell me that story? Don't mess with me, I whisper back. Talking about a skinwalker at night can draw it to you. I didn't think about that when I told the story. Just stay quiet and stay down, and hopefully it will leave. The sound of another stick snapping didn't help at all. After a few long, frightful hours of laying there, eyes wide open, it seemed to go away. Eventually, I fell asleep, I guess. I don't remember falling asleep, and don't know how I could have. My cousin was already packing everything up by the time I crawled out of the tent. I know we planned for 2 more nights, but we're getting out of here right now. Yeah, I'm with you on that, I said. Now, I can't say for sure if it was a skinwalker that night, but what I can say is that I definitely heard my cousin calling my name from outside the tent when he was sleeping right next to me. And that was by far the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. So, take my advice and save the skinwalker stories for when you're safe in the comforts of your home and not at a campfire.